I am a firm believer, and I learned this from my mother, that one of the best things that we can do is make people comfortable. I had a great example in my mom. It didn't matter who the person was, whether it was somebody that she had met in the street. It didn't matter if it was someone that was cooking for us. It didn't matter if it was someone who was struggling through life or was selling us something we didn't need. She always made sure that people were comfortable. And this is something that has resonated with me all my life, is how do you make people comfortable? Well, I can tell you this, rarely do we achieve this with words. My mother taught me that comfort is really established with nonverbals. How she opened the door to strangers to ask them what it was that they wanted. How she treated my friends by gently touching them, each and every one of them, as they would come into the house. She could have just opened the door, but she took the time, and I'm sure it was no effort for her, that as each of my friends came in, her hand was on their heads as she would introduce them into the house one by one, touching each one of them. And I remember oftentimes my friends saying, we really like being here. And our house was no different. It was very middle class. It was no different than anybody else's house. But I think the biggest difference was this gentle woman who took the time to impress upon each and every one of us that she cared for us. And she did it not with her words, but she did it with her gentle touch. And as I've grown up, I've tried to incorporate those things which I have learned from her and from my own studies. And I found this extremely useful in my FBI work. Last year, I was teaching at the FBI Academy, where I still often teach, and I had a young FBI agent who said, well, I've read about you, I've heard about you, I've looked at your books. How was it that you were so successful? How was it that you got people to confess? How is it that in a 25-year career, after thousands of interviews, there were only 2 people that never confessed to you? Everybody else confessed. How do you do that? And I said, well, I'm not sure I have a lot of wisdom here, but I can tell you this. I never had anybody confess to me who said, I decided to tell you the truth because you treated me like crap, because you treated me less than human, because you weren't nice to me. And in fact, the reason that I had success was not because I was clever. It wasn't because I was smart. It was simply because I made people comfortable. I made people want to spend time with me. I made them feel like this was quality time. And if they were with me, they would feel that they were appreciated. And in the end, they would confess. What I learned was that the secret to interviewing, the secret to success in the FBI, was based on 2 things: observation and the ability to make people comfortable. By creating comfort for them, I was guaranteed more face time. And the more time I got to spend with someone, the more time I got to observe them. And the more time I got to observe, the more time we had to communicate. And the more time we had to communicate, the more time I had to get to the truth. There's no big secret here. There was no clever line that I used. There was no trickery. It was just, what can I do to expand my time with this individual so that in the end I will learn the truth? And I learned this from my mother. And later, when I left the FBI and I started my own companies, I found that it was no different. How do you become successful in business? Well, you don't do it with a 3-minute conversation, and you don't do it with an email. You become successful by creating a comfortable environment in which the person you're dealing with wants to spend more time with you. so that each and every time you are with this person, they feel they are being rewarded. I can't tell you how many meetings I sat through in the FBI where halfway through the meeting, as I looked around, everyone in that meeting looked constipated. They looked in pain. And I'm thinking, why would anyone want to return to these meetings? I have been to the debriefings of sources who at one point got to the point where they refused to meet with their agent handlers. And I was called in to try to fix this. And as I walked in there, and I could see the problems. The problems were that there was no comfort. This was not a fun event. So why even participate in it? And as I direct myself outward now to the business community, I say, what is it that you're doing to create comfort? Because comfort is what's going to get you past the receptionist. Comfort is what's going to allow you to spend quality time with this individual. Comfort is what's going to say, you know what, I want to invite that Joe back. I feel good when I'm around that person. And how do we do that? It's not with the words. You can't say to someone, hey, I'm Joe, you're Bill, feel comfortable. It doesn't work. We establish comfort the way that my mother taught me to establish comfort. And we do that non-verbally. So how do we do that? Well, we do it with our facial expressions. Yes, we can do it with a smile. And I tell people, always have a smile. Because even babies respond to a smile. We are primed to look for that smile. And I'll tell you, there's nothing worse than going up to the counter, and I run into this all the time with the airlines, and that person cannot muster a smile. I am the customer. I demand to have a smile. And I tell employers this all the time. In this economy, and you have an employee that cannot muster a smile, fire them. And you say, wait a minute, that's a little harsh. No, that's not harsh. That's practical. In this economy, you cannot get an employee who can smile. Smile should be written into the contract. You will smile. And it will be a genuine smile. Why? Because smiles are powerful. Smiles are innate. Smiles are part and parcel of our species. We look for smiles. We are made comfortable with smiles. And then they say, what else? And I say, I'll give you the example of a circumstance that I had with a very large financial organization. And you go up to their 11th floor, they're in Midtown Manhattan, and only special people, special investors get to go up to this 11th floor. And it's magical up there. They have butlers. They have a chef. They have anything you want, except for one thing. I said, what? When you get up to the receptionist there, the receptionist is sitting. And you walk up to the receptionist and you state your business. The first time I went up there, I said, there's something wrong here. I've got to study this. And so they said, well, what would you change? And I said, look at how much money you are spending. You have butlers up here. And you're proud of that. You have a chef standing by to cook whatever these people want. And you have a receptionist who is just sitting there. And I'm saying from this day forward, you're going to change this. Here's what you're going to do. The minute somebody walks through that door, your receptionist is going to stand. They're going to stand and they're going to greet the individual. And you're going to find that the people who come into this room are going to feel special. Not because there's a butler standing by. They may never ask for a butler. They may never ask for a chef. But they're going to look at the first person that greets them. And they're going to say to themselves, I like the way I feel when I come up here because I feel special. 3 months later, I got a letter with a check from this organization. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying, wait a minute, I've already been paid. The letter said, "This is small compensation for how you have transformed how we are perceived by our clients." And I'm thinking, because of how they stand? Because of how they stand at reception. I learned this from my mother, who used to tell me, anytime the nuns come into the room, you stand up. Anytime the rabbi comes into the room, you stand up. Why? Because they deserve it. Wow. They deserve it? I'll tell you who deserves it. Our clients deserve it. So then they said, well, what else would you do non-verbally? I said, what's the number one thing that's bothering people right now? Not with finances, but with security and with identity. They said, well, it's identity theft. And I said, here's a nonverbal. Here's a nonverbal you can do. It'll cost you less than $40. And so they're getting ready to write this down. And they said, well, what's this nonverbal? And I said, make sure that in every room where your clients are going to go, that there's a $40 shredder. And they looked at me and they said, a what? Have a shredder in there. I said, why would we do that? Because subconsciously you're saying that your security, that number one thing that we care about, our safety, our security, first we care about our well-being, eating, breathing, and so forth. The next thing is security. That this next item is so important to us that in every room we're going to have this $40 inexpensive shredder. And as the end of every meeting, once we've taken notes and so forth, we're going to shred whatever we don't want. But why do we want to do that? Because the powerful message that goes out is this: we care about your security as much as you do. And this is a visual reminder that this is important to both of us. So they said, well, what else? And as I looked around the room and there were 6 or 7 gentlemen there, I said, fellas, I hate to say this to you, but you're going to have to change your suits. And they looked at me like, well, these are expensive suits. In fact, one of them said, this is an expensive suit. I said, let me tell you something. It doesn't matter to me how expensive your suit is. And in fact, most men can't tell a $200 suit from a $2,000 suit. You can buy a $200 suit at JCPenney and have it tailor-fitted for $30 and it looks like a $2,000 suit. But I'll tell you what matters. What matters is this: don't wear brown colors. They looked at me like, well, I have brown-colored suits. Here's the research. We prefer men in blue, navy blue, black, and gray suits, and we don't like people in brown suits. And they said, well, that's not fair. To which I said, that's life. That's life. This is the reality. When we put men in suits in front of peer groups, when we put them in front of focus groups, when we put them in front of juries, the ones that are always rated the least desirable are the brown suits. And here's another thing. Get rid of those 3-button suits. Wear the 2-button suits and wear that button as low as possible so that you can see the ventral aspect of the chest. And as we proceeded, they began to notice that what I was talking about was a combination of things. The things that make us comfortable, but also the things that make us appear to be competent. The things that make us appear to be truthful and trustworthy. I said, have you ever noticed that politicians are always in front of a blue background? And they said, no, we haven't noticed. And I said, well, we're having a political year this year. You'll see it from now on. And why is that? Because the research says that when we stand in front of a blue background, it makes us look more authoritative and more competent. So at this point, they're quite excited. And they said, come on, what else? And I said, start with how you shake someone's hands. You want to mirror them as much as possible. And then you want to immediately move off to the side. And they said, shouldn't we stand in front of them? And I said, no. You shake hands, you assess for distance, as we've talked about before, and then you move slightly to the side. Well, why is that? Because the research says that around the world, direct, men on men, nose to nose, is too aggressive. When we stand at angles to each other, we're most comfortable. And then one of the women there says, well, what about women? And I said, well, women on women, you can do that any way you want. And men should always approach women directly and only move off to the side when the woman decides that now it's time to angle. But there are many women, especially those who may feel insecure for a variety of reasons. You stand in front of them, you approach them from the front, and you remain there until they feel comfortable. It's all about comfort. Well, what about sitting? I said, you're moving too fast. I said, what about walking? When you walk with this person, keep in mind that this is an opportunity to communicate. So you want to walk with someone at the pace that they're comfortable with, not at your pace, at their pace. So you want to walk with them. And by walking at their pace, you begin to establish synchrony and harmony. There's nothing worse than you're walking at a certain pace and someone is rushing ahead of you, or worse, they're way behind you. By synchronizing your walk, you're beginning to establish sympathetic channels of communication. And now you can sit. And where do we sit? Well, the research is very clear on this. The worst way to sit is directly in front of each other. I often joke, maybe it's not a joke, that when you sit across from someone, that's how they sit at the White House. That's why they don't get anything done. When they go to Camp David, then they get to sit next to each other at 90 degrees and at angles. That's your most productive. That's what the research tells us. That's why things get done. When you can sit at an angle to someone close by. Because when they're directly in front of you, it's competition. When they're sitting next to you, it's cooperation. And so we begin to see that we can set the tone of comfort and discomfort through very subtle things. How we are greeted, where we are led to, where we get to sit, who communicates with us. All these things play a part. And one of the things that I often remind young agents and I tell business people, that many times we can get more things done by going for a walk and talking than by sitting down and trying to discuss it. And I've had so many examples in business of this, where we are up to a point in our discussions in the room. But when we walk, and I always tell the people I'm working with, let's walk for at least half a mile, so quarter mile each way, that things will open up to us, because we have to do something. If we have to walk a long distance, what's there to do? We talk. So there's many aspects of comfort. Temperature, color of the room, the amount of noise. Obviously, you want to have soothing colors, soothing sound. You don't want to have distractions. All these things play a part in comfort. The more successful you want to be, the more time and energy you're going to have to devote to creating comfort. And that we do non-verbally. And the funny thing is, and once again, I learned this from my mother, that creating comfort is not that difficult. And once you learn to do it, and once it becomes part of your life, it is not a challenge. It is not a chore. It becomes your life. It becomes your reality. And it becomes your channel for success. We're at the point now in our discussion of nonverbal behavior where I feel confident in talking to you about detecting deception. I can assure you that as an FBI agent, this was something that was always uppermost in my mind as I conducted investigations. And I think in part it was because when I went through the police academy and then later the FBI academy, there was so much emphasis on trying to determine when someone is lying to us. And over the years, I found that this was a very difficult task. And in fact, this was verified when in 1985 and 1986, researchers began to publish authoritative scientific papers on the topic of deception. And what these researchers found was the average person is no better at detecting deception than 50-50. In other words, a coin toss. And in fact, law enforcement officers, those people that I worked with, myself, who thought that we were really, really good at detecting deception, were in fact no better than chance. So what was it that we were being taught? What was it that we were looking for? Well, here's what the research now tells us. Here's what my own experience as an FBI agent tells me. Nothing has really changed. It is still extremely difficult to detect deception. And in fact, if you devote yourself merely to trying to detect deception, you're going to miss a lot of good information. Now, what does the research tell us about deception? Well, at this point, this is where the drum rolls would come in. And here are the facts. Number one, and this is the most important one, there is no Pinocchio effect. The fact of the matter is that there is no single behavior indicative of deception. Not nose touching, not covering your mouth, not closing your eyes. None of these behaviors are singularly indicative of deception. Now, are there behaviors that are associated with deception? Yes and no. And the reason that we say yes and no, it's simply because of this. Most of us, when we think we're seeing deception, what we're actually seeing are indicators of some sort of distress. We're seeing indicators of anxiety. We're seeing indicators of tension. So what is it that we're looking for? Well, one of the ways that we as investigators look for deception is by not focusing so much on deception, but as you've seen from some of the examples that I've talked about, is what are the things that cause this individual to have stress? So one of the ways we do that is to ask very broad, very general questions, and then see how the person reacts to those very broad questions. Now, one of the things that we find is that honest people tend not to be bothered by difficult questions. They know that it's part of a process, and so no particular question has any more weight than, say, any other question. So when we say, well, tell me about your life, tell me where you were this whole week, tell me where you were last night, tell me where you were between 7 and 9 last night, these questions are all perceived the same way. Now, there may be some tension and anxiety, as there should be, because anytime someone's asking us questions, there's going to be a certain amount of tension. But we're not bothered by hearing these questions because we anticipate we're going to be asked those questions. What happens, though, is when someone is hiding information or is intentionally trying to be deceptive, they're going to be bothered by both hearing the question and they're going to be bothered by having to process that information as they're trying to develop an answer. And thirdly, they're going to be bothered by having to answer the question. So what we'll see is a series of behaviors indicative of discomfort during those three phases. The first phase is, for instance, where were you last night between 7 and 9? And the person may give a hard swallow, or they may begin to touch their neck or massage their forehead and so forth as they're contemplating the question. And then as they process that information into how they're going to answer it, we may see some additional signs of distress. And then lastly, as they answer the question, we may see, for instance, the cracking of the voice, a higher pitched voice. There may be some more hard swallows. There may be some more pacifying behaviors, and so forth. But is it truly indicative of deception? And here's the unfortunate fact. These same behaviors that I'm talking about, we see with both the honest and the dishonest, depending on what's going on inside their heads. If the person is too concerned, is overly concerned about their own security, or things that maybe are unrelated but have happened in the past, that may influence what we are seeing. So I tell people that, yes, it is true, and the research does support the fact that liars tend to have certain behaviors. They tend to, for instance, speak less with their hands. They tend to over-control their hand and body movements. They tend to have voice changes where they speak in a higher pitched voice. They may have a hard swallow. There's any number of behaviors that are associated with that. But these behaviors can also be seen in honest people when they're struggling with something. And so I have to tell you that as an investigator and someone who has been at this for over 30 years, rather than concentrate on deception, because it's so difficult to know, I would say look for indicators of stress or distress. Look for indicators of discomfort. And whenever you see an indicator of discomfort, once the initial interview is over, go back to those issues and then seek greater details, ever-increasing details. So let's go back to that original example where I said, well, tell me about your week. And as they tell me about this information, if I see any indicators of discomfort, I'm going to make a mental note of that. And then I'm going to visit that again and again and again, each time not in an accusatory manner, because that will make people defensive, but in an inquisitive manner. And this is really the best that we can do, because there's no way to always know the truth. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that even with people who are willing to reveal information to us, they never really reveal everything. Think about it, those of you who are listening to me. How many times have we told our parents everything that we ever did? Hopefully you've never done that. I know I don't want my mother to know everything I've ever done. And the fact is that we conceal a lot of information. And we have often lied. How many of us, as soon as we hear the phone and it's answered, we say, tell them we're not home. We lie because it's a tool of social survival. We don't really tell people how we feel about how they're dressed or what their children look like and so forth. So because lying is part and parcel of our species, it's part and parcel of how we do things to get along, we've actually become quite adept at it. And in fact, the people that are the most dangerous to us, those are the ones that are the best liars. So your antisocials, your sociopaths, your psychopaths, they're actually experts at telling lies and not giving away any revealing tells. They're the ones that actually engage in more eye contact, not less. So this is why I say to you, spend your time learning to decipher and to know nonverbal communications. Become an expert at reading people. Become an expert at comfort and discomfort cues. And realize that once you know how to do this, you don't have to worry about deception. All you have to worry about is this person comfortable or uncomfortable with the topic that they're discussing. And if there's any kind of discomfort, that's something for us to pursue later on. So I wish you luck. I know many of you wanted to know, well, this Joe Navarro must know something secret about detecting deception that will solve all crimes and will rid us of evil and so forth. No, I'm just like you. The only advantage I have is that I concentrate on things such as reading the nonverbals of our fellow man, understanding in real time what it is that their bodies are communicating, relying on the exquisite limbic system, which knows how to communicate truthfully, and then looking for comfort and discomfort at all times. Comfort to establish effective communications, comfort for success, and then looking for discomfort to address any issues that may arise. One of the questions that I'm often asked is, how did you go from being an FBI counterintelligence agent into the private sector? And one of the ways that this happened is, number one, I had been writing for the intelligence community, and I'd been writing books for several years, even while I was still in the FBI. And then one day I get a phone call from an individual out in Vegas who said he was a poker player. And I said, well, how can I help you? And he said, I've read some of your stuff. I wonder if you wouldn't mind coming out to Las Vegas and teaching poker players how to read nonverbal communications. Now, I'm not a poker player and I'm not a gambler. So as I pondered this question, and I asked this individual, and you are who again? And he said, well, my name is Phil Hellmuth, and I am a bracelet winner in poker, and I've won 10 bracelets. And I said, well, is that a lot? And he said, that's only been done by 3 other people. And I said, oh, well, then this is rather interesting. And he says, look, I've only read your stuff. I'd like for you to come out and teach us how to read nonverbals. And I said, I'll be happy to do it, but I'm not sure I can teach this from a poker player's perspective, but I can teach it to you from the perspective of a practitioner. And he said, that's fine. And one of the things that I found, which was fascinating to me, is the same behaviors that I had seen in the theater of the interview, I was watching and observing in poker players. So we've talked about disappearing lips and how that's an indicator of something that's distasteful or distressful. And we see it with poker players. When they look at their cards, they're not necessarily happy with their cards, and you see their lips disappear. Now, this once again tells us that most of us don't know the faces we make. We don't know where our lips are. We don't know what we're doing with our faces. But our brains are transmitting this information in real time. I'll give you another example. We often see with poker players is they will look at their cards, they'll think about what they're doing, and then all of a sudden, they'll grab their cards with the thumb and the middle finger, and they'll hold their cards with the thumb and the middle finger. And what does that mean? Well, I started to observe this, and I noticed that people who did this would soon fold. And I started to think, why do we do this? And it goes back to the limbic system and the protocol that we have of freeze, flight, fight. And so by grabbing things with these 2 fingers, what we're seeing is actually distancing. What we're seeing is something similar to being handed a dirty diaper, and we kind of hold it out away from us with these 2 fingers. And this is exactly what we were seeing with the poker players. This touching of the cards barely on the edge, because they don't like their cards, so they begin to distance themselves from it. And I started to catalog all these behaviors that I was seeing, that I had seen in the theater of the interview. And this was very similar to something I had seen years ago when I had taken a picture of a crime scene, and I had the suspect in front of me. And as I turned and showed him the photograph of the crime scene where the homicide took place, he was touching it differently than he had touched all the other photographs that I had shown him. Of the specific crime scene, I noticed that this individual was holding the photographs by the edges. He was distancing himself from that which he was seeing in the photograph, in the same way that the poker player was distancing himself with his middle and thumb as he held his cards. And there's other behaviors that I've observed with poker players over the years which actually are helpful to us, for instance, in a business environment. I was watching a female poker player who just happened to be pregnant. And she's looking at her cards, and she's in a pretty good position from what I can tell. And then the flop comes out, so you have 3 community cards that come out, and she looks at her cards, she looks at what's out there, and suddenly she purses her lips, which we know means something negative. And then she immediately went to reach for her neck. Remember, I talked about women who cover their suprasternal notch. But as she reached her neck, her hand immediately descended and covered her belly. And I've seen this multiple times before, both in poker and in business. And it's one of those interesting things that we do, at least women do, that when they're pregnant and they feel insecure or they feel threatened or they feel they're in a bad position, the natural tendency is to cover their neck. But there's something that tells them, no, the fetus is more important. And so the hand immediately goes to the belly to protect them. And I've actually seen this in court with a female attorney that was pregnant. When a surprise witness changed his testimony, that was her first and most immediate reaction, was to cover her belly. In other words, in an instant, she went to protect that which was most precious to her. And again, a true limbic indication of something that was harmful, something that was distasteful, and it was in real time. So what have I learned from reading poker players? All the behaviors that I've talked about, comfort and discomfort, you'll see those at the poker table. But you'll also see them in the boardroom. You'll see them around the water fountain. You'll see it with family. You'll see it in the family nursery. You'll see it at the family get-togethers. You'll see it with new people that you meet. And once again, we're basically programmed to reflect comfort and discomfort. And if you remember nothing else at all, if you fail to remember many of the things that were said here, probably the most important thing is this. When in doubt, when you see behaviors, ask yourself, are these behaviors associated with comfort or are they associated with discomfort? And I think you'll find that your lives will be richer and more fulfilling when you're able to read the nonverbals of the human body and to apply them in your daily life. If you haven't noticed by now, for me, it's a pleasure to teach. And even though I was primarily an FBI agent for 25 years, I was also teaching at the same time, both within the FBI and later at the University of Tampa and at St. Leo University in Florida. There's nothing more pleasurable for me than to see people, students, colleagues, associates who see things for the first time the way that I see things. As a person who has been studying nonverbals all of his adult life, it's easy for me to see the application of this information in everything that we do. In dealing with our spouses, in dealing with children, in dealing with our teachers, in dealing with institutions, in dealing with our fellow employees, and in dealing with people that we're meeting for the first time. This knowledge that I have, this knowledge that I have shared with you, is something that can literally change your life. It can make you a more perceptive person. It can make you a more enlightened person. It can certainly make you more entertaining and interesting, but it can also make you a more sensitive person to the human condition. It can attune you to those subtle things that make us humans. It can allow us to intervene before we are being asked to intervene. It can allow us to be better parents, better teachers, better physicians, better healers, better helpers. And it's really very simple. It's really based on the idea that we humans communicate constantly, that we communicate comfort and discomfort. And so it has been my pleasure and it has been my thrill to be here with you, to share this knowledge with you, and to help you in your path to greater knowledge of human understanding and nonverbal communication.
Hi, this is Dan Strutzel. At this moment, you're probably feeling excited, inspired, motivated, empowered, and most importantly, ready to apply the information you've just heard. We at Nightingale Conant want you to keep that feeling going today, tomorrow, and for the rest of your life, and use it to create the life of your dreams. But we know that's not always easy to do. I'm going to share with you a simple yet extremely effective secret that will help you to maintain the motivation you're feeling right now and really achieve the goals that first inspired you to listen to this program. It's called the Online Mission Statement Builder. In just 5 short minutes, this free, easy-to-use online service will give you a detailed, clearly defined, printed statement of your life's mission that will give you the power to truly accomplish any goal, spiritual, personal, or financial. Your mission statement will be like a guiding light, keeping you focused on what's important, the person you're becoming, the life you dream of, and the goals you plan on achieving, so your life unfolds exactly the way you want it to. Use this free service now, and you'll immediately propel yourself toward the achievement of your goals and dreams. I know, because thousands of people have already taken this opportunity and experienced rapid and dramatic life transformations as a result. This is your invitation to be next. If you're committed to having more, doing better, and living life to the absolute fullest, and you'd like to achieve those goals in record time, simply visit our website at www.nightingale.com/mission statement to begin the process. That's www.nightingale.com/mission statement. Remember, there is no cost for this powerful service and no obligation. But I do urge you to visit www.nightingale.com/mission statement now. If you hesitate, the momentum you feel now may fade away over the days and weeks to come. That's what happens to most people. They let their hopes and dreams pass them by. Please don't let that be you. Take action now, and you'll change your personal, professional, and financial future immediately and forever. Go to www.nightingale.com/mission statement